Thank you. It's wonderful to be here to see so many good friends. So I want to start with a story about Elon Musk. So, as you know, he's a man known for his boldness and his entrepreneurial genius. Last week, Elon abruptly announced that he was moving his businesses out of California to Texas. And in an interview with psychologist Jordan Peterson, he explained why. He said that when California Governor Gavin Newsom signed into law a new bill prohibiting schools from telling parents when their own child was identifying as transgender, it was the last straw. Musk, it turns out, had previously warned Newsom and said, if you sign legislation that puts children in danger, I will move my companies out of California. And now he's making good on that promise. He's a man of action. But the most powerful moment in this interview came a few moments later when Musk spoke from the heart, not as a billionaire businessman, but as a father in deep pain. Peterson asked Musk why he had become such an outspoken foe of so-called gender-affirming care. And Musk immediately countered, and he said, gender-affirming care is a, quote, terrible euphemism. It's really child mutilation and sterilization. And Musk went on, he said, it's very possible for adults to manipulate children who are having a natural identity crisis and manipulate them into believing they're the wrong gender and they need to be the other gender and that will solve their problems. And then they give them sterilizing drugs called puberty blockers, sterilizing drugs so they never have children. It's macabre, it's evil. Those were his words. But then pain just etched on his face. It was tremendously moving. He said, it happened to one of my older boys. I was essentially tricked into signing documents giving permission for puberty blockers and hormones, into signing documents for one of my older boys, Xavier. I was told Xavier might commit suicide. He repeated again, it's incredibly evil. But then he continued, and speaking softly, kind of haltingly, you know, the way a person in pain speaks when they're just holding it all together. And he said, I lost my son, essentially. They call it dead naming for a reason. It's called dead naming because your son is dead. My son, Xavier, is dead. He was killed by the woke mind virus. Woke mind virus. It's an apt description of the transgender revolution, which is pure insanity. The transgender revolution reveals a culture that has lost its grip on reality. Elon Musk's suffering, unfortunately, is not rare. The families I know who have gone through the exact same experience will tell you that the pain of watching a child self-destruct, cheered on by gender evangelists who sometimes are in your own family, is searing, it's raw, and it's relentless. And the anger also runs deep. Anyone with a heart is certain to feel great compassion for Elon Musk, for his son, for anyone else who experiences such pain, loss, or alienation because of a child's so-called transition. But let's zoom out from this personal tragedy for a minute and look at this story through a wider lens and ask some questions. First, what's at the heart of the problem here? If we take our cues from legislation and public policy, we might think that these contested questions of sex and identity are merely medical questions, kind of the types of disputes that we need to turn to experts for. Remember Matt Walsh's documentary and his famous question, what is a woman? Well, isn't it a question of biology, a question of evidence? Well, 25 states so far have indeed sized up the issue of gender transition from a biological and medical perspective. They've passed laws that in varying degrees ban medical or surgical interventions in minors for gender transition purposes. Now, these laws are based on the state's police power, the government's duty to protect its citizens, particularly children, from harm. So the laws tackle limited, identifiable issues, informed consent, the immaturity of minors. They assess the adequacy of the evidence base and ask, is it really sufficient to justify these experimental procedures that have such lifelong consequences for minors? And these are really valid concerns. Everyone knows that teenagers are too young to make life-altering decisions with permanent consequences. The mantra of gender-affirming care, however, is let the child lead. It's pure nonsense. If you're a parent, you know that. It's pure nonsense. Every parent knows this intuitively, unless ideology overrides that parental instinct. And Musk himself pointed out the contradiction of prohibiting teenagers from getting a tattoo, but permitting them to seek life-altering hormones and surgery. Deferring to a child's every want and desire is the very definition of poor parenting, except apparently when it comes to sex and identity. So I'm grateful for these laws and for the courage of medical professionals who expose the harm of medicalized gender transitions, for the lawyers who write the legislation or defend them in court. But even so, these laws are not the answer. They can only contain the damage. They can't reverse the tide, because the heart of the problem is much deeper. It's anthropological. When a teenage boy identifies as a woman, our objection cannot be that he's simply too young and impressionable to decide for himself whether he's a man or a woman. It's simply not true that if he just waits a few more years until he's more mature, that then, if he still claims a female identity, we can relax and we can say, you know, he must be right. When an adolescent girl seeks a double mastectomy because she's convinced herself that she, quote, feels like a man, and she hates her female body because it doesn't match her feelings, our best answer cannot be, honey, the evidence is just not there right now. Let's wait until there's more research, until we can see there's a lasting emotional benefit to getting your healthy breasts amputated. It's simply not true that a sound study showing some sort of psychological benefit to removing the healthy breasts of a troubled teenager would somehow make it all okay. This isn't an age or a maturity problem, or even an evidence problem. It's a deeper problem. Young people like Xavier have been seduced by an anthropology, a belief system that's premised on the oldest lie known to man, and that is, you decide. You decide what's true for yourself. You decide who you are. You decide what's good or evil. You decide what to do with your body. In fact, my body, my choice, that abortion slogan is now used routinely by the gender activists. And they have common cause. Planned Parenthood is now the second largest provider of cross-sex hormones for transition purposes. So that message, you decide. You get to judge what will make you happy. And the whispered backdrop, kind of the unstated premise of this refrain is really, you know better than God does what's good for you, what's right for you. So go ahead, disregard his moral precepts, his design for your body, for relationships. You can even deny his existence because you are the master of your universe. You get to decide. Many of you are familiar with the gender unicorn or the genderbread person. These are images, very colorful and kind of cutesy, that are used to sell children on this false anthropology, to convince them that there is no truth, there's no coherence to their creation as male or female or to the design of their bodies, that what's most important is that they choose, they decide who they are. These images present the human person as a bundle of disconnected dimensions with very little meaning, except for their feelings and their choice of identity. The individual gets to decide who their authentic self really is, regardless of the fact of their male or female body. If you think about it, that's a pretty heavy burden to lay on a child or a teen. Imagine waking up every morning, taking your emotional temperature, and trying to figure out if you feel more like a boy today or more like a girl. I've actually seen videos of parents who are all into this, putting their children through this day after day, just this continuous shifting and instability. Imagine doing this if you're only 5 years old, because this is down to the preschool and kindergarten level. A more recent image of this false anthropology is the gender galaxy, kind of magnifies the lie. So children are told that gender is this amazing world, it's theirs to imagine, a place to fashion themselves and the world around them after their own desires. They are masters of the universe. They can name themselves like the stars in the sky. They can choose their identity. They can set embodiment goals and change their bodies accordingly. It's magical thinking, but children believe it. So I decide the refrain, the theme song, the narrative, if you will, of man's rebellion against sex and sanity is rebellion against God himself. So how do we get here? And what do we do? I think one of the seeming conundrums, really, of the transgender issue is why so many parents, mature, well-educated, thinking adults, why do so many parents reflexively acquiesce or even endorse the claims of the transgender revolution? Why is a child's claim to be born in the wrong body, to, quote, be trans, even plausible? Why didn't we hear over the past decade, as we've seen this tremendous spike in the number of young people who are identifying as transgender, why didn't we hear this massive collective outcry across the land of parents saying, no, this is insane? Yes, there were some parents, but more often, there have been thousands of parents, teachers, counselors, and physicians who simply accept the precepts of gender ideology as true. Until 2 years ago, most Americans, 6 out of 10, passively supported gender ideology as well. In response to poll questions, they would say that they believed a person's identity was not fixed at birth. We know it's set at conception, but the question was birth versus whether you can just decide it later. And 6 out of 10, 2 years ago, said, yeah, people can decide. They can choose for themselves. That has shifted. Now it's 6 out of 10 who are understanding reality, who are on team reality. The same is true of self-described Catholics. It used to be about 50-50, and now we're in positive territory. But I wonder, why isn't it higher? Why isn't it higher? Consider the claims of gender ideology, and I'll just blitz through this because you know this. But Christian anthropology is rooted in the truth that we're created by a loving God, created for relationship with him, created for eternal life with him. Gender ideology says, no, you are a self-creator. That's the descriptive term that the pioneering gender doc at Boston Children's used. He sort of marveled at watching, as he said, children creating themselves as they went on the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones. So a different vision of who the creator is. Your identity in Christianity is as a son or daughter of the Lord. It's relational. According to gender ideology, your identity is self-defined. You are whoever you say you are. Your dignity as a Christian is inherent. It comes from being created in the image and likeness of God. Gender ideology says, no, your dignity is contingent. You need validation. You need legal recognition. Or your dignity is erased. We know we have a destiny for eternal life. Because gender ideology is at heart atheistic, it's all about the here and now. Christianity understands we're a unity of body and soul. Gender ideology says, no, we're dualistic. What matters is your mind, your feelings. Your body's merely a tool or a canvas for personal expression. And if the body has no meaning, well, then the only purpose of sex really is pleasure. And sex becomes something that's degraded into a solo act as opposed to the relational understanding, the self-giving, the unitive and procreative meanings that we understand through Christian anthropology. Marriage, too, in Christianity is the lifelong union of a man or a woman and the fruitfulness that comes from that as they build a family. Gender ideology says, no, marriage is about fulfilling adult desires, and family is chosen. It's a collection by consent. And then finally and importantly, Christianity understands we're all broken, we're all sinful, we need redemption, we need grace. Gender ideology says if something's going wrong in your life, it's not your fault. Figure out who the oppressor is and take them down. So you could not have a more direct clash or conflict than between these two visions of the person, between Christianity and gender ideology. Every significant truth about the human person, as understood by Christians, is contradicted or undermined by gender ideology. But gender ideology's beliefs are at the core of the sexual revolution. This didn't just sort of percolate up 5 years ago or 10 years ago. These strands of thought and these beliefs have been there now for decades with roots that go farther back. A side note, for anyone who's interested in a deeper dive on understanding man and woman, there's going to be a fantastic conference at Franciscan October 24th through 26th called Man and Woman in the Order of Creation. It's the brainchild of Franciscan professor and Thomistic scholar Deborah Savage, and it's co-sponsored by the Ethics and Public Policy Center, so many of the speakers here will also be there. So I apologize, I can't go into more detail, but you can get it there. That's going to be live streamed too. But when we look at our culture, Monsignor Shea, who wrote that terrific little book about From Christendom to Apostolic Mission, Pastoral Strategies for the Apostolic Age, he notes that every society has a set of assumptions, ways of looking for things that are largely taken for granted. That becomes a compelling narrative that shapes our decisions, our choices, sometimes even in a way that we're not aware of it. That used to be Christendom. We're not in Christendom any longer. The implicit assumptions woven into today's culture, the compelling narrative that shapes people's decisions and defines their purpose, are no longer Christian. The culture is being reshaped to make gender ideology the default narrative. The understanding that it just permeates our being, our institutions, about what it means to be happy and what it means to be a human person. So gender ideology and the normalization of all its fruits, from casual sex to masturbation to pornography, contraception, abortion, homosexuality, and now transgender identification, is irreconcilable with the truth about the human person. In truth, gender ideology is a preposterous belief system. And it's easy to understand why kids can be convinced of something that's preposterous, right? They're kids, they don't know anything. And when a trusted adult comes along and says, you have the power to reimagine yourself, to become someone new. You can leave behind the body you don't like, your mental health struggles, your insecurities, and become someone new. That's a pretty attractive package. It solves their problem, and it puts them in charge. I decide who I am. But children are children, and the world is saturated with gender ideology, so we can expect some confusion. But again, here's the question worth asking. Why would a genius like Elon Musk consider it even plausible that his child would be happier if he follows his feelings and decides he's a girl? Yes, Musk was manipulated by the false suicide threat, but why was it even plausible? And not just Musk. I see this with many families, even Catholic families, who somehow think it's possible for someone to be born in the wrong body. There must be something else besides male or female, and God got it wrong. Here's the answer. The transgender deception becomes plausible when parents have already bought into its false premises in their own lives. perhaps they've already accepted the lie that they can choose, regardless of the moral law, whatever they like, that they can disregard the natural order, that God has nothing to say of value about sex and relationships or family. When you reject God, his created order, his moral laws, and disregard even the logic of the body, when you reject the basic truth about the human person, you're making it up as you go along. Anything is plausible. Anything is possible given the technology. And isn't this the story of the sexual revolution and the role of technology in supposedly freeing us? 65 years ago, the birth control pill won approval from the FDA. The pill, in my view, was the very first widely accepted transgender intervention. Why do I say that? Because it established the premises. Its widespread use conditioned people to view God's natural design for sex, the complementarity of male and female bodies, the purpose and fruits of our union, as a barrier, as an obstacle to the self-defined human happiness that we seek. So married people and singles alike embraced technology's power to sever that link between sexual union and procreation in pursuit of a social goal. It met their subjective criteria for personal happiness. It's the same thing that happens in the transgender revolution. It's a difference only in terms of magnitude, not kind. The pill implicitly taught women that their bodies and their fertility were also problems, additional obstacles to freedom. There must be something wrong with God's design. And the solution is to exercise their power of choice, to disregard God's plan, to do it their way. Women were persuaded that they needed the power to decide their futures. They could no longer trust God and his plan. They needed to be able to have sex like a man, sex without consequences. All I can say is, what a bad idea. And so many women, there have been numerous books that have been published just in the past few years of women coming to this because of their own experiences. But interestingly enough, Jack Turban, who's a Stanford psychiatrist and one of the most vocal champions of transitioning children, of hormonal castration and gender surgeries for adolescents, he recently defended the use of cross-sex hormones in adolescence by saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's no different from putting these adolescents on birth control pills. It's probably safer. The pill disables the healthy body's natural function to achieve a social goal. We've already accepted that now for 65 years. Why shouldn't we accept puberty blockers? That's his logic, which does the same thing. It disrupts a natural process in a healthy child to achieve a social goal. Consider another aspect. Once that link between sex and procreation was broken by technological manipulation, we as a people largely forgot what sex is for. We forgot sex was about babies, and the consequences were predictable. If you've read Humanae Vitae, you know that. But now, when sex is only about pleasure, there's no natural argument or logical argument in a secular sense about why we should be against any sexual activity as long as it's legal. Right? Why not? And in fact, we've seen the activists bring pressure to bear on the psychiatric community so that now the latest version of the ICD, the World Health Organization's classification of diseases, has removed what used to be called paraphilias. In other words, fetishes, perversions, things like that. And they said, unless it's a public health problem, not our problem. People are free to do what they want. So where do we go from here? Well, first, a caution. One of the good things that's come about in the past few years has been people waking up to what's happening with transitioning children. And so these laws are a good thing. But my worry is this, that in the short term, we may win that battle against medicalized gender experiments in minors, but lose the war against the bigger evil, the social, cultural, and political embrace of a false and degrading and dangerous vision of the human person. the consequences of embedding a false anthropology, not only in our cultural soil, in our laws, our language, but in the human heart, are far-reaching. We end up with coerced participation in morally impermissible transgender medicine, the suppression of conscience rights, restrictions on religious liberty of Catholic employers, institutions, the denial of free speech, the normalization of dehumanizing transhumanist medical experiments, medicine being transformed from a healing and restorative profession to something that's simply about meeting and responding to consumer desires, the absolute decimation of parental rights and family integrity, and the promotion of a sexualized, ultimately misogynistic, it always goes in that direction, inhuman culture. So as I stressed before, it's a good thing to fight the terrible things that are being inflicted on children, but we have to keep our eyes on what the real issue is. We have to recognize that the entire body of gender medicine rests on that false premise. You can be whoever you want to be. If the technology's there and there's you give informed consent, we can go for it. Today, gender medicine, which initially started with sort of a Christian gloss as a compassionate thing, is now simply about granting human rights and human autonomy. So what should we do? What can we do? Well, first, live with integrity. As Catholics, we need to examine our lives. Are we fully surrendered in our own lives, in our relationships with God, spouse, to His design for our bodies, for our sexuality, for our families? Second, don't be discouraged. St. Paul, my power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you. And Pope St. John Paul II, we are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are the sum of the Father's love for us and our real capacity to become the image of His Son. Third, picking up on Andrew Abella's talk, be courageous, be convinced. There's no daylight between truth and charity. Adhering to the truth is what is loving and good. So we can't back off and apologize. We need to be convinced. Invite, don't impose, but be convinced that God truly knows what is right and good for us. Fourth, be kind, prudent, and patient. My husband once said, I've never forgotten, that the art of evangelization is the art of presenting the right truth at the right time in the right manner. We don't have to all send Elon Musk the catechism so he gets the rest of the story. We can take it slow. There are millions of people, though, like him, for whom the truth is breaking through simply because of their own experience, because it's built into the human heart to yearn for it, to look for it. So we can encourage that. We can be there. We can be patient. We can use, this is my final point, use all the tools at our disposal: prayer, scripture, Catholic teaching, but also science, personal experiences, and genuine friendship. We need to walk with others with great patience and love towards sex and sanity, God's style. And there we will find the peace of Christ. Thank you.